The coffee is still too hot to drink when the brokerage notification appears. Not a headline, not breaking news, just a quiet deposit. A number so ordinary that no one at the next table would notice it. Yet behind that single line is a fortune large enough to change generations. The woman reading it doesn't smile. She doesn't reach for her phone to tell anyone. She closes the app, picks up her ceramic mug, and watches the morning traffic as if nothing remarkable has happened. Because after a certain point, wealth stops changing how your life looks. It changes how your mind sounds. People assume $80 million announces itself with designer clothes, glass towers, and exotic vacations. But they rarely imagine the woman driving a 10-year-old sedan, buying fresh vegetables at the neighborhood market, returning library books on time, and walking the same peaceful streets every evening. That's because most people confuse consumption with ownership. Behavioral economists have long observed that social comparison quietly shapes financial choices. Many people spend to signal success, even when it delays real wealth. The paradox is simple. The louder someone tries to look rich, the harder it often becomes to actually become rich. She learned that lesson decades ago, not from a billionaire, from her grandmother. Every Sunday afternoon, they sat at a worn wooden kitchen table while sunlight crossed faded curtains. Her grandmother kept a notebook that looked too old to matter. Inside were columns of handwritten numbers, not expenses, not shopping lists, but shares. Tiny pieces of businesses. The notebook smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. People chase money, her grandmother once whispered while sharpening a pencil. I'd rather own the places where they spend it. As a little girl, the sentence meant almost nothing. Years later, it became impossible to forget. While classmates celebrated bigger paychecks, she quietly celebrated ownership. While neighbors upgraded houses every few years, she bought another fraction of productive companies. While friends measured success by visible upgrades, she measured it by invisible cash flow. The difference seemed insignificant in any single year. Compounding has a way of hiding until suddenly it can't. Decades passed almost invisibly, dividend after dividend, market crash after market crash, election after election, recession after recession. The outside world kept changing its predictions. Her investment journal barely changed at all. Each January, she brewed coffee, opened the same notebook, now replaced by a simple spreadsheet, and asked only one question. What do I own today that will still be serving people 20 years from now? That question quietly built something almost no one around her could see. Not because she had extraordinary income, because she refused to interrupt extraordinary patience. And one ordinary Tuesday morning, sitting in an ordinary cafe surrounded by ordinary people, she realized her life had become anything but ordinary. The realization didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived while choosing between two brands of olive oil. She stood in a quiet grocery aisle comparing prices, not because she had to, but because the habit had outlived the necessity. Financial psychologists often note that habits formed through years of disciplined behavior become part of identity. She no longer saved money to become wealthy. She saved because that was simply who she was. Outside, her older car waited beneath the afternoon sun. A teenager glanced at it and looked away, assuming it belonged to someone still trying to get ahead. If only he knew. That modest vehicle was parked by someone who owned tiny pieces of hundreds of companies around the world. Every coffee purchased, package delivered, prescription filled, and utility bill paid quietly strengthened businesses she already owned. Her wealth wasn't hidden in a vault. It was working while she cooked dinner, read novels before bed, and walked the same peaceful neighborhood every evening. She had discovered a strange freedom. The less she needed to prove, the more peaceful life became. But that peace would soon face its greatest test. Not from a market crash, but from something far more personal. The phone rang just as she was reviewing her annual statements. A family member needed help, not because of bad luck alone, but because years of chasing appearances had quietly become years of debt. Bigger homes, newer cars, vacations financed by tomorrow's income. She listened without judgment. Behavioral economists call it present bias, the tendency to value today's pleasure more than tomorrow's security. She had seen it many times, never in textbooks, but around dinner tables. She agreed to help, but not by writing an endless check. Instead, she spent an afternoon at her kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee, a yellow legal pad, and a calculator. Together, they listed every debt, every asset, every monthly expense. For the first time, the conversation shifted from income to ownership. When they left that evening, the money she transferred mattered far less than the mindset she hoped had taken root. She looked back at her own investment journal. $80 million hadn't come from predicting the next winning stock. It had come from repeating ordinary decisions long after they stopped feeling exciting. And as she closed the notebook, another question surfaced. One she had quietly avoided for years. If money was no longer the destination, what was it actually for? She found the answer on a Thursday morning that looked like every other. Coffee steamed beside an open window. Birds filled the silence. Her calendar was almost empty, not because she had nothing to do, but because every hour belonged to her. Researchers studying self-determination often find that autonomy, the ability to choose how you spend your time, is one of the strongest predictors of lasting well-being. Looking at her life, she realized the greatest return on her investments had never been measured in dollars. It was measured in unhurried mornings. She volunteered without checking the clock. She visited friends in the middle of the week. She read annual reports with the same quiet curiosity others reserved for novels, searching for businesses that would still matter long after the latest trend had faded. No one around her suspected that the woman in comfortable shoes, carrying a canvas grocery bag, controlled a portfolio worth $80 million. She preferred it that way. Privacy had become its own luxury. Every assumption people made about her granted another layer of freedom, freedom from envy, expectations, and the exhausting performance of looking successful. But one final realization was still waiting for her. It would redefine what she believed her fortune truly represented. The final realization came without ceremony. One evening, she opened the same investment journal she had kept for decades. The numbers were astonishing. More than $80 million quietly invested across businesses that continued to serve millions of people every day. She closed the notebook almost immediately. For the first time, she understood that the number itself had become the least interesting part of the story. What mattered wasn't the fortune. It was the woman who had been shaped while building it. She had learned to wait when others rushed, to stay calm when markets fell, to celebrate ownership instead of appearances, to choose enough over more. Economists often describe compounding as a mathematical force, but perhaps its greatest power is psychological. Every patient decision reinforces the next one. Every year of discipline strengthens the identity behind it. Over time, wealth compounds, but so does wisdom. The neighborhood hadn't changed. The coffee still tasted the same. The old car still carried her to the grocery store. The morning walks were still quiet. Only now she could see what had been growing all along. Financial independence wasn't a destination hidden behind a giant number. It was the freedom to wake up without selling your time to protect your lifestyle. It was the confidence to remain invisible in a world obsessed with being noticed. It was knowing that your future had been built through thousands of ordinary moments that no one applauded. Perhaps that's why the wealthiest woman in the cafe looked so ordinary. She had stopped trying to look successful long before she truly became successful. And maybe the greatest luxury money can ever buy is not attention, but the privilege of living exactly as you choose, quietly, intentionally, and without asking the world for permission. If this story stayed with you, perhaps it's because it was never really about $80 million. It was about the quiet decisions that shape a lifetime. If you've ever believed that true wealth is measured more by freedom than by appearances, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if these calm, reflective stories about investing, patience, and financial independence resonate with you, you're always welcome to return for the next one. Until then, keep building the life that doesn't need an audience. The quietest fortunes are often the ones that echo the longest.